Ari Lewis Show.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Thank you for joining us. At any time, you can email the program at arilewishow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station at Israel Sports and News Radio at gmail.com. So much news in the boxing/MMA world. Floyd Mayweather picks his opponent for September in his quote-unquote last fight. Rocky 7 comes out, and Rhonda Rousey victorious again in the first round. Online to discuss all of this, the author of the Domino Diaries, and of course the filmmaker of the hit film Split Decision, the best boxing writer in the United States, Mr. Brin-Jonathan Butler. Brin, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
Yes, indeed. So Floyd picks his opponent. It's not Amir Khan. It's Andre Berto. Not the toughest opponent out there. The theory is Floyd wants to go out easy for win number 49. It won't really be his last fight. Perhaps a rematch with Manny Pacquiao next year. Do you think that is the correct thought of this conventional wisdom? That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's every reason to believe that he would try to leverage an easy fight, and then from there he's got number 50. Biggest fight out there is still a rematch with Pacquiao, but maybe what he's trying to do is offer his services for maybe 3 fights, maybe 4 fights after this last one, and that would open him up to being able to maybe negotiate with HBO, create a bidding war. There's a lot of interesting things that could happen from this, but in the short term, I would say immense disappointment that the opponent for his 49th fight is Andre Berto. I don't think anybody is clamoring for that. So it's almost rubbing it in our faces, the fact that he's going to make, I think his minimum is $37.5 million for whoever he fights, be it Andre Berto or you or me. So this is a strange choice, and I don't know who on earth would pay for this or even watch it on TV.
Well, apparently the deal is going to be will air free on CBS. That's the plan. You think that's what will happen at the end?
That was the original plan, and I've heard that Mayweather was unhappy with that. He sees himself as a pay-per-view fighter. So that's the latest I've heard, is that he is not open to doing that, in which case if it goes to pay-per-view, I mean, how much is that going to cost? Even if it's $50, which sounds like a minimum for Mayweather, I don't know anybody but diehard fans who would pay for that. And even them, I think that's a stretch. Unless the undercard is scintillating, I don't know who on earth would pay for that. Berto is in no way in line to fight Mayweather as it stands, and there are several opponents who would be very exciting. Amir Khan in England or Las Vegas, for that matter, Thurman, a Golovkin fight, something daring to go out on if this is indeed his last fight. But a Berto fight is, Apollo Creed fighting Balboa, and I do not see Berto as Balboa, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we'll get to Rocky 7 later on. Don't worry for the fans listening. But this fight you're talking about, because it's his last fight on his deal with Showtime. So that would mean, does he want to go out maybe in a knockout performance, and that would, I don't know if lift his price, but you're talking about a bidding war. That would mean he would have to do something spectacular because the opponent is so bad in comparison.
Yeah, but I don't know that Mayweather almost every fight promises that it's going to be an exciting fight or he'll fight in an aggressive style. It's never happened. I don't feel he feels any onus to people who pay for his fights to give them something worth their money other than to show up. So, I mean, a couple times where he has fought in fights that were interesting, I'm thinking, especially the first Maidana fight, Cotto, we saw Floyd that wasn't as mobile as we've seen him in the past. And then, I guess Pacquiao with an injured arm didn't really need to do much in that fight. But, I've written about it before. I don't think there's ever been a great fighter, and I do feel Mayweather is a great fighter, certainly, who's been more content to stink out a fight than him in the history of the sport. And that's disappointing because I think he is an exceptional fighter. I think he could be putting on immensely competitive fights and could fight in a style where he left a lot more in the ring. But that's not his orientation. His orientation is to do as little as possible in order to secure these massive paydays. And it's a guy, let's remember, who's coming off of, $220 million purse for a fight. I mean, it wasn't long ago that 1/10 of that was seen as obscene with Mike Tyson and Spinks back in the late 80s. So it's a strange world we're in, and Mayweather is back-to-back the most lucrative athlete in the world, and another Pacquiao fight he could still probably rake in, $100 million perhaps. So he has all the leverage right now.
So let's say, again, and I don't think anyone really believes that the fight in September is his last fight. So he perhaps wants to try to get a 3-fight deal. Are there 3 opponents or 3 fights for Mayweather outside of Pacquiao that the public would watch or be interested in?
Yeah, I think Keith Thurman is undefeated. He's powerful. He's strong. I think Danny Garcia just fought kind of an embarrassing fight against Malignaggi, not because Garcia is embarrassing, but just Malignaggi coming off a knockout loss from, I think, 14, 15 months ago. Not a strong opponent. So you got Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, and Amir Khan are all 3 credible opponents. As I mentioned before, you could have a super fight if he wanted to go against Golovkin, perhaps, if Golovkin came down a bit in weight. Give a rematch potentially with Cotto. Let's say Cotto beats Canelo. That could be interesting. If Canelo wins that, you'd have Canelo as a potential rematch. So there are viable options. Pacquiao, of course, I think by far is the most lucrative. I don't know that it would be any more competitive than it was the last time, even with a healthy arm. But yeah, there's definitely some fights out there for Mayweather, and I agree with you. I don't think there's a hope in hell that he would retire at this point.
And by the way, with that being said, people don't like Mayweather, and you talk about him staking out fights and being overpaid, all that kind of stuff. But boxing, does it really have a star that could take his torch when he retires anyway? So maybe it's not so bad if he's hanging around, even if he is not as exciting as he should be.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody of his caliber right now. I mean, Mayweather is a fighter like most. It's very rare in boxing where you say, when is that guy fighting next? The natural question is, who are they fighting next? Arturo Gatti springs to mind. Fans of him were notorious for just saying, when is his next fight? They wouldn't bother to ask who the opponent was. They didn't care. Mayweather's entire career has been defined by who is he fighting, and does that guy have a hope in hell of defeating him? And he's leveraged that brilliantly to make himself the most enticing person to watch lose that really boxing has ever had. And he gets all the credit for that from a marketing perspective. What I find is disappointing, and I think a lot of fans do, is just his total unwillingness to sort of have a desire to make great fights. As far as he's concerned, the bottom line is that he got a victory. He doesn't care how that victory came about. I can't think of many Mayweather fights where he wasn't booed for his performance. And I think that's just a byproduct of the fact that he has so much talent and skill and potential, and he in no way wants to take any chances. So, the great ones have all been defined by what they were willing to give, not what they had. So Mayweather will leave the sport with more money. I mean, he already has more money than anybody's ever earned. But in terms of that respect factor, I think something will linger that will be unpleasant with boxing's relationship with him. In a way that's even a little different than Mike Tyson. I think Mike Tyson had all the potential at one point in people's minds to be the greatest heavyweight who ever lived. Obviously, that was totally squandered by the Buster Douglas fight and a number of other close fights. He's been scrutinized a lot differently after the second half of his career, but I think people did feel they got their money's worth with Tyson. Whereas with Mayweather, so many of his fights, there's just been the boos, the disappointment, the buyer's remorse, and his glee at cashing in on that kind of sentiment is something a little bit new, I think, in the sport. I can't think of many people who are in his class in that particular aspect of his legacy.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Speak with Brin-Jonathan Butler about the boxing world. Floyd Mayweather set to take on Andre Berto in September. So let's get 2 predictions. 1, what happens in the fight? And 2, what happens after the fight? Does Floyd stay with Showtime, go to HBO, or even another network?
My prediction would be that the fight doesn't happen, that it gets stalled for some reason.
Oh, okay.
The fight hasn't been built up at all. we're what, a month away? So, I mean, I don't know how this gets on pay-per-view with no time to build it. Pacquiao Mayweather doesn't need anything to build it. They didn't really do much media because they didn't need to. Something like this, I don't know. I mean, how is Mayweather going to sell it to the public? It's not going to leave boxing fans in terms of people who are going to attend it. So I just see something else happening here, where maybe he's using it to negotiate sort of a longer-term deal with one of the two networks. If it does happen, I think given Heyman's relationship with HBO right now, it's hard to see him going to HBO. And Showtime definitely is going to feel pretty upset that they've invested all this money, lost money in most of the fights of the recent contract. Of course, that's with Canelo and Pacquiao. They made incredible amounts of money. But it's really Heyman and Mayweather who've capitalized the most off it. I don't know how well Showtime has done from it, and I don't know how well their brand really has done by incorporating Mayweather and his legacy to what they're offering. So I think he's going to stay with Showtime, and I could see 3 or 4 fights after this, probably 3 more. Pacquiao, the winner of Cotto and Canelo, and maybe Amir Khan. I mean, there could be 100,000 people who would go see that fight in England if the MGM Grand didn't have dibs on it. So there's some interesting scenarios to follow, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, this will be a weird question. I'll be curious your response, but Rhonda Rousey victorious Saturday night. I'm not going to pretend to know who she fought because I don't really care, but she is a rock star. And they've been talking about this for at least a year. What would happen if Rhonda Rousey fought Floyd Mayweather in a UFC fight? John Jones has been on the record saying Rhonda would win. Dana White and John Jones have biases. Some people think the idea is ludicrous, but hey, it's that type of world we live in. And Rhonda said Floyd likes to beat up on women. What would happen the other way around if she fought him? I want to get your opinion on this hypothetical matchup. What would happen?
I think she'd win. I think anybody. I mean, I say it a little bit from personal experience. When I was a teenager in amateur boxing myself, there was a guy who asked to spar with me who was not in great shape, and we sparred for a couple of rounds, and I annihilated the guy, and I just couldn't understand why he wanted to spar in the first place. And at the end of it, he said, my background is actually in Jeet Kune Do and grappling and that sort of thing. Would you like to try that? And I thought, well, geez, given what happened in the boxing, I owe it to the guy to do some of this grappling thing. It became readily apparent that he could end my life in seconds if we had a street fight. Seconds. And I would destroy this person in a boxing ring. And that has been very instructive to me about these skills. If once a fight gets onto the ground, if you don't know what you're doing, I don't care how good a boxer you are. It is meaningless. I mean, James Toney might be the most talented boxer who ever lived in terms of his skill set and composure. And I think Randy Couture knocked him out or choked him out, rather, in 30 seconds,
yes.
45 seconds. I mean, he was useless. He was just utterly useless. And I don't think Mayweather has done anything regarding grappling or any of those skills. And if you don't have that skill set in the MMA, you are just asking to be choked out in a matter of seconds. So I think she'd beat him in a UFC fight. I think he would beat her in 15 seconds in a boxing fight, though. So, I mean, not that that's a huge accomplishment, given he's the bigger man and,
right.
One of the greatest fighters who ever lived. But and I think most boxers would destroy UFC fighters in boxing also. I think their stand-up ability with striking is pathetic from a boxing standpoint.
But the interesting idea is that if he was going to fight a man of his size and skill level, etc., then you figure, well, okay, you could see he's got grappling power, but Rhonda Rousey, no disrespect to my female listeners, is a woman. So even though she's a woman, you're saying the grappling is so good by her that she would win in a cage fight, in a UFC fight against Mayweather.
Yeah, I say this I train people here in New York as well, people who want to get in shape or learn self-defense and, knock somebody out. If you hit somebody properly, you just need 5 pounds of pressure to hit on the jaw or the point of the chin to knock somebody down. 5 pounds is not much. I mean, that's like turning a doorknob kind of thing. It doesn't take anything. It's where you do it. It's knowing what to do. And the same is true of that grappling. If you know the pressure points, if you know how to get people in position and they're not aware of what they're doing in that kind of conversation of the bodies, that a fight is on the ground. I think it would be enormously easy to disable somebody and get them to submit with some kind of pressure point or, leveraging their arm to break it or whatever. And she's obviously highly gifted with those kind of skills, and she's tenacious and a great competitor. And I just don't know how well Mayweather would do without, he's such a defensive-oriented person, and boxing affords you that ability to stay out. There's not nearly as many variables in boxing as there is in MMA. So I think this has kind of been borne out in the MMA, is that you can't really have a perfect record for a long period of time in the MMA. There's too many things you're worried about, and too much element of risk and I think luck also. So I would heavily favor her in a MMA style fight personally.
Wow. All right. Well, there you go. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. My guest is Brin-Jonathan Butler. And with that being said, that fight would never happen in a million years, right?
I hope not. But I mean, it's funny you say this, because the gym I was originally at in Vancouver, there was a little Asian man who was 5 feet tall, and I think even with a huge amount of steroids, he was about 130 pounds. I think he was a jockey originally. This guy was just one of the most obnoxious, sort of preposterously weird characters I'd ever come across in boxing in my life. So naturally he ends up getting the odd distinction of becoming the first man to fight a woman in a legitimately contested boxing match. He fought a Marine, I think, in Washington State, and lost to the female Marine. But it was covered in Sports Illustrated, and I couldn't believe what could possess somebody to want to gain notoriety from fighting a woman and then lose. So I have been up close with somebody whose psychology was built towards, I want to fight a woman, and I don't think it's an accident that people, what's that comedian from Saturday Night Live? Oh God, Man on the Moon was the film.
Oh, Andy Kaufman, Andy Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman was the world intergender wrestling champion. I mean,
right.
I love it. It's so brilliant and taunting women. It seems like straight out of a carnival sideshow to propose it. Like everybody should be in on that joke, but maybe it's something that will come down the pike as an eccentricity. I mean, back in Coliseum days, after people got bored with watching animals slaughtered or people, they did bring women into the Coliseum floor to fight, and they didn't allow them to wear helmets so everybody could see that they were actually women. So there's oddly precedent in this, which is pretty disturbing. But anyway.
I mean, Dana White made a joke. He was asked if the fight would happen, how much money he would make. He said $1 kajillion. In all seriousness, I feel like it may make more money than him fighting Pacquiao. I mean, you have so many elements. You would have the sexes going at each other, women's rights, and the general intrigue, and then both sports. I mean, would it make more than Manny versus Floyd Mayweather?
I never thought about it until now, but I do think you're right. It's very unusual. Again, it sounds straight out of the pages of Vince McMahon's playbook with wrestling. Bringing Mr. T into wrestling, bringing actors, bringing people from other genres of life, and incorporating them into this fabric of imagination of wrestling. It always worked well there. I remember as a kid, it was thrilling to see a boxer step in, or a basketball player. They brought in Dennis Rodman and a whole host of characters. So I don't see why it wouldn't play very well. I think Rousey is a very interesting character. I just got back from a trip where I was gone to Spain for a month, and had I not gone, I was actually going to interview Rhonda just prior to this fight that she had in Brazil, and I was looking forward to that. She's an interesting character. There's some interesting features to her life story. Her father was a suicide. She has quite a history of bad relationships with men. There's some interesting stuff there that I would like to know about her and understand what she's overcome, because there's no question, she's a very compelling character. I don't know where she's headed, but I mean, she's still young. She's still got a lot in front of her, and she's just annihilating opponents in almost Tyson-like fashion. I know even Mike Tyson said he sees a lot of himself in her and her approach. to the sport. So it's exciting and it's very interesting. I can't think of another sport where a woman is the most important face of that sport. You know, she's bigger than any male equivalent. And I don't know about you, I can't think of another sport where that's true, and I think that's fascinating and really encouraging.
Also because it's such a physical sport. It's not a feminine sport, and the face is a woman, and let's be honest, she's a pretty attractive woman. I mean, that's part of it too, and I'm sure that's part of the selling point, right, is that she's a nice-looking woman that's doing something masculine.
Yeah, I think seeing some of these strong women who are attractive, and I think it kind of expands the tent of what people are allowed to say is attractive, that she doesn't look delicate or dainty. You know, that saying strong can be sexy in a woman. That doesn't make her a man, or a bunch of these pejoratives that women have been put down who are more physical and independent looking. And she seems fierce. You know, she's fierce, and then the moment after the fight, yeah, she's getting on the cover of a lot of magazines that are very quick to celebrate her beauty. So I think she's a very interesting role model for women, and she's an interesting sex symbol for men. I think she has a tremendous amount of potential ahead of her. And let's remember something else, that at the time of the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, where these guys are making something like $300,000 per second of a 12-round fight, she only made, I think, $140,000 for the fight that she had just prior to that fight. So she's not making any kind of money relative to her celebrity and stature in the sport. She's not making anything. So I think that is an interesting commentary on where the UFC is relative to boxing. You know, even pretty schlocky fights. You know, the one that happened, Danny Green fighting an over-the-hill Paulie Malignaggi, he's still making $1.3 million for that. And I think if Rousey is selling big pay-per-view, and that was not a pay-per-view fight, the Malignaggi-Garcia, if she's selling big pay-per-view, she's selling out arenas. How on earth is she making $140,000? I mean, that's an interesting statement about income inequality between the sexes in that sport, and I think just in general, how poorly paid the MMA fighters are by the establishment. I think it's embarrassing, and there's going to be some kind of reformation there to make it more fair.
Yeah, you know, maybe at the end of the day, Dana White is Don King in a different type of clothing. I mean, it seems, we talked about this with Tito Ortiz. He said that Dana White takes advantage of fighters, and people kind of laughed at Tito Ortiz, but that appears what's going on. I mean, you're right. The fighters in UFC make very, very small compared to boxers, and they're pumping a lot of money. So is Dana White a bit of a con man here?
I think Dana White's going to run into a lot of problems. If you look at what he's already said publicly in terms of wanting to turn the UFC into like the NFL, which is an odd thing to want to be run like, given they just settled, a $750 million lawsuit, which many people feel was a modest settlement given what they're accountable for in hiding all those injuries. But if that is the model that you are trying to adopt for your sport, it is fascinating to see somebody like Dana White with Anderson Silva, who I think is the greatest talent I've ever seen in the MMA, just extraordinary talent. And if he didn't fight up to his full potential in terms of making an exciting fight, and this was just an off-the-scales brilliant fighter, and how creative he was, how dominant he was, et cetera, Dana White would publicly call him out after a fight, say it's boring. You know, I'm not going to let you fight somebody else if that's the way you're going to perform. You're making me look bad. Imagine if boxing did that. I mean, imagine the scoldings that Floyd Mayweather would be getting for his performances. So in some ways, I thought it's nice to see somebody with the fans' interest, that there's some penalty if you don't fight in a way that's exciting. Because we want to see exciting fights, obviously, as fans. But from the perspective of competing for Dana White, being employed by him, you think, well, don't you have any consideration to my health? Like, there's a reason why if I'm dominant, I don't want my head taken off. I want to be able to choose fights that might be a little safer for me than to just explore, hugely dangerous fights, fight after fight after fight after fight. Well, Dana White isn't getting in the ring. he's not taking any risks. So of course he wants the best fight possible, and because he'll make the most money from the fans. And in the UFC, there's a lot of people trying to break into that sport, so you can replace any of the top people. They haven't been very good at creating narratives for any of their top fighters. I've said this before, and I got into some trouble with it, but I'm not criticizing the people who compete in it, but I feel as if there has not been a narrative in the UFC that has been more compelling than the haircut of Chuck Liddell. I don't know anything about the fighters, and I don't care about them. I don't find them interesting. And the most interesting one they put forward is this Rhonda Rousey, and she's very interesting. But it almost takes talent to have not created a narrative with a sport that is so incredibly popular. I don't know how they've managed to do it, where it's all of their talent is middling in terms of transcending that sport, and I don't know why they're so ineffective in communicating compelling stories with their athletes. Because you think boxing is nothing but great narratives, and with the UFC you think, what's the big difference between them? Not a lot, but they haven't been able to sort of get over with any of these narratives. And I would hold Dana White really accountable for that. Who's the greatest narrative in the UFC? It's Dana White.
Yep.
And there's a problem. There's a problem there.
Well, that's why I say the Don Cain analogy, because Don Cain took some advice from record producers that said, hey, the key is you want to be a bigger star than your clients, and you want to be the face. Don Cain obviously got that done, and Dana White's getting that done right now. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports Radio. Excuse me, Israel Sports News Radio. Sorry. My guest is Brin-Jonathan Butler. Last question about Floyd Ronda Rousey. I don't see the fight happening, but partly because Floyd would never take it. Floyd's got everything to lose unless they offered him maybe $500 million. But Floyd's not taking that fight, right? If somehow it was possible.
I mean, he's gone into the WWE fighting some giant. I didn't see it, but I know he did it. He did Dancing with the Stars. I think Floyd will definitely go where the money is.
Wow. Okay.
I agree with you that does he need the money? No. But would he turn
money.
down? He likes money. Would he like $100, $200 million to fight Ronda Rousey in the UFC? I mean, I agree that it's a huge lose-lose for him publicly. But I mean, what endorsement is he going to lose for that? He's unendorsed by anybody. By anybody. Like, I mean, not Exxon, oil or nothing. So I think he would take a big paycheck. I just, I don't know.
But if he lost, he couldn't look himself in the mirror. I mean, all his friends would tease him for the rest of his life. Yeah,
especially considering he's like 20-0 against all the ex-girlfriends he beat up. To suddenly lose, it's
cruel twist
and that's one thing I really admire about Ronda Rousey is her calling him out about that. Because, the journalists have started doing it after Dan Roberts did it with Deadspin. He's a friend of mine, and I've interviewed him for other stuff I've done following up on Floyd. But I like how Ronda Rousey has challenged him and called him out. Because you notice the true spirit of Floyd when people confront him about things, it's his cowardice. He does not step up to the challenge when it comes to discussing that part of his history. And even the lead up to the Pacquiao fight, he refused to have any commentators talk about his history with domestic violence. And I mean, if somebody paid their debt to society, I could see laying off a little bit at a certain point. But this is a guy where I think women are really at risk with him in the future. And I've always felt like if anybody's going to become O.J. Simpson in the future, it's going to be Floyd Mayweather. He has the best resume of anybody in sports to assume that role. And I don't think people take it seriously enough.
Yeah, well said. Again, what can you say? Obviously, hopefully he somehow turns his life around, but you brought up that his horrible history, his abuse from his father, the stuff he saw, and all the domestic violence situations, and he keeps getting pass after pass. So it's pretty scary. But going on a lighter topic, how can we do a boxing interview and not talk about Rocky? I thought Rocky 6 9 years ago, he kept saying that'd be the last one. I mean, he said all the Rockies would be the last one, and now there's a Rocky 7 where he's going to train Apollo's son. Your thoughts, Brin-Jonathan Butler?
Well, one thing that I watched the trailer for Creed, and I like the kid who's in it. I forget Michael something, that he was in The Wire. I think one of the last seasons of The Wire. He's very talented and seems all over the place in movies. He's very good playing Creed's son, I think, son or nephew or whatever. He's Creed. And Rocky is his trainer. Is this obsession that Rocky has with this line that he wrote. And if you watch the earlier Rockies, Stallone steals from everybody in boxing. He steals from Ali. He steals from Customato in Tyson's story, which is Rocky V. With Tommy Morrison is playing Tyson's role. Clearly a Don King ripoff in that, wearing fur coats. But he has this line in Creed where it's not how hard you can hit, it's how hard you can get hit.
Right, which is a theme of Rocky VI, yeah.
Yeah, he constantly is repeating it as if it's the most profound piece of wisdom and illumination about the nature of being a successful boxer. I have no idea what it means. Like, just because you can take a great punch in boxing, there's been a few guys who could take a hell of a good punch. Ali, George Chuvalo. That in no way turns you into one of the great fighters in the history of the sport. Like, you have to be able to do something. You do have to be able to hit people effectively in order to be a great fighter. So there's just something so clumsy about Stallone with this. I mean, I love some of the early ones in like a little kid sort of way, but it just seems like Stallone is stuck in this 8-year-old fantasy of who he is and what boxing is. And, there he is in the Boxing Hall of Fame. I think he was put in a few years ago. So I guess he just doesn't have much left that he has to say. So Rocky still works. I mean, when was the last Rambo? A few years ago? I mean, was it even that long?
And the Expendables. I mean, he's not stopped. He's in his late 60s. He keeps going. But it's kind of like regular boxers. They say it's their last fight. Like Floyd Mayweather in 2007 said his fight against De La Hoya would be his last fight, and it's not. And Stallone said clearly that Rocky VI would be the last Rocky, and it's not. I guess that's more my beef than anything else.
Yeah, it's just so strange to me, these old guys. I mean, they're pushing 70 years old, and still they're, even Rocky VI, he somehow got in the ring for that, where he's fighting Antonio Tarver, I believe?
Yeah.
I mean, and there's Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, 67-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's the Terminator. It's the same guy. Like, come on. It's just, I don't know. It's a little, even with the music, you see the same thing. These guys are 70 years old and they're, shaking their ass on a stage. I don't understand the appeal personally. I wish there was sort of room that was made for some new guys and some new stories. Like, people used to like new stuff at some point in the culture. I don't know what's happened with the, do I need to see Rocky 45? Not really.
That's the thing. Like, you figure at this point by now that there would have been some new action heroes that people would be more interested in than a 70-year-old Stallone or a 70-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, it's just like when they were doing their early stuff, like, is it that hard for me and you to come together and say, okay, hey, I've got this idea for a movie called Commando. There'll be this guy, he's a commando, they steal his daughter, and he's going to chase them and kill everybody. Is it that hard to come up with, like, a different outfit for the guy to wear, and it's basically the same movie? I hope not, but where are these movies? I just don't know.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy situation, but with all that being said, I've got to know, Brin-Jonathan Butler, are you going to watch Rocky VII, a.k.a. Creed?
Well, I'm definitely going to illegally screen it on my laptop, yeah. I mean, am I going to pay for it? Good Lord, no.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. There's enough intrigue for me to see it, but not enough for me to pay money to see it. So I guess we'll leave it at that. My guest has been Brin-Jonathan Butler, author of the Domino Diaries. Brin, where can everyone out there pick up your book and other works that you've done?
All of my stuff is available on Amazon, as far as the interviews I've done with Mike Tyson and Errol Morris, and my books, Domino Diaries and the Cuban Boxer's Journey, are available there, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore in the United States. And yeah, if you're not in the United States, Amazon is a good way to go to find all the stuff I've written. So, yeah.
All right, there you go. Brin-Jonathan Butler, the finest boxing writer in the United States. His prediction, this fight with Berto may not happen. Keep an eye out on that. Brin, thanks so much for being on the program, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Lots of fun. Take care.
All right, be well.